In June of 1903, after a 6-year engagement, Edgar Cayce and Gertrude Evans married. Cayce had begun his own photo studio in Bowling Green. He and his bride welcomed the escape from his reputation back home as a psychic doctor.
He didn't know how he did it. He just knew that he was able to do it, and he wanted to use it to help people.
But Bowling Green soon learned about Cayce's abilities, and he could not say no to the needy. The readings resumed, and in the autumn of 1906, Edgar, then 29, was asked to demonstrate his trance diagnoses before local doctors.
They came first thinking, I'll expose this guy. I'll see through him. You could see the condescension in their faces.
Yes, we have the body, Edgar declared as he would by routine at the beginning of every reading. He correctly diagnosed a college student's attack of typhoid fever. Then, unexpectedly, some of the doctors tested Edgar's trance state by sticking needles into his hands and feet, certain he was a fake. Cayce never flinched or bled, but when he awoke, he vowed angrily never again to be anyone's experiment.
Slowly, he began to learn that there weren't that many who really cared. A lot of people wanted to use him. Not many wanted to listen.
Edgar's safe haven had always been the church. Now he wondered, as did his fellow churchgoers, whether his gift was a blessing or a curse.
Evidently, some of the people in the congregation really got upset, that thought that this character was teaching Sunday school to their children on Sunday morning.
Edgar was accused of the church's worst offense, heresy. Though he was later declared innocent, it was a painful experience for Cayce. In response, he worked harder than ever, adding a second studio and taking on consignment $40,000 worth of art from New York. Business was so good that Edgar and Gertrude planned on building their own home with the profits. Then, disaster struck. 2 days before Christmas 1906, fire destroyed the studio. The unsold New York artwork would plunge Edgar $8,000 in debt. Incredibly, another fire would strike his second studio within the year. Edgar needed some good fortune. It came in a 9.5-pound bundle. Hugh Lynn Cayce was born in March of 1907. Edgar, the new father, eventually paid all his debts, but was forced to move in with Gertrude's disappointed family back in Hopkinsville. There, his father introduced him to homeopathic practitioner Dr. Wesley Ketchum.
Ketchum was pretty much a promoter, and he wrote a paper that was read at a big clinical medical society in Boston. The New York Times covered this and gave Edgar a full-page treatment, which is hard to imagine these days.
The Times article, trumpeting Cayce as an illiterate, was widely read. Soon, over 10,000 letters requesting readings were sent to Edgar by the chronically ill or those who had lost hope with conventional doctors. Many sent money, though Cayce had never charged for a reading before.
Edgar knew that he didn't do it. It came through him, and it was a gift that could come through him. I think that's the reason his ability was so good, because he didn't have concern of making money on it. It was really pure to help other people.
Ketchum offered to finance a photo studio in return for Edgar's readings. The time had arrived to decide how to use these powers. After a sleepless night, Edgar agreed, but on his own terms. His father would conduct the readings, and a stenographer record them for later review. And the money, nearly $2,000, would be sent back until services were rendered. Edgar's course was set.
I noticed on one occasion, he said, some people ask me whether I'm a spiritualist or whether I'm a medium. And he said, I guess the term for me is a psychic, but I really think of myself as a man of God.
Cayce settled into a routine of giving 2 readings a day, lasting approximately 45 minutes each.
It wasn't anything weird, as a lot of people would think. Dad would simply lie down on a couch or bed. He had a couch in his office. If he had a tie on, he would loosen his tie and just cross his hands over his stomach and just lay back and relax.
When Edgar's eyelids began to flutter, the conductor, Edgar's father, and Gertrude in later years would know Edgar was in trance. The suggestion was then given, the name of the person and where they would be at the time of the reading.
Now, the person could be in the room, or he could be in another state or another city. It didn't matter. I remember one time he had a reading on a man who was supposed to be in an apartment in New York. Dad lay there a minute and says, "We do not have the body." I said, "He's not here." I said, "He's on a bus coming across town." I said, there was a traffic accident. The bus is late." I said, "He'll be here in a minute. We'll wait." And all of a sudden, he said, "He's come in now."
A call to the man in New York later verified everything Cayce had said.
Now, there's a beautiful piece of clairvoyance, of something that somebody couldn't have anticipated that would, seems to me, point to the accuracy of his readings.
From his sleep state, Cayce demonstrated a remarkable knowledge of anatomy, as if he were looking right into the patient's body. To the continual surprise of doctors called in later for second opinions, Cayce would pinpoint the problem, say a blood disorder resulting in anemia, and then offer a remedy. Most were home or herbal concoctions and included diet restrictions as well. When Edgar discovered that some patients weren't fully following his often detailed remedies, he began to envision a hospital with supervised care. It would become his obsession. By the spring of 1911, the future was looking bright for Cayce and family. A second son, Milton Porter, was born at this home in Hopkinsville. But Milton developed severe whooping cough and colitis. Edgar gave a reading, but the child could not be saved. Milton Cayce died in his second month.
The son that did not survive was a shock to both of them. And Gertrude's illness followed. She had, I suppose what we call postpartum depression and more.
Gertrude was a woman of beauty and strength, but the death of her infant son shook her to the core. Her health declined, and she developed tuberculosis, which had killed her brother. After doctors gave her a week to live, she appealed to Edgar for a reading.
And Edgar did it, but he was scared to death because this was the person he loved most, and he was scared that he might say something that would be fatal. Turned out just the opposite. And he says that that really was the turning point. From then on, he said, if that could happen for the one he loved most, then it might mean that that's what he was supposed to be doing.
Gertrude fully recovered, her health monitored by what Edgar called check readings. But his newfound faith was betrayed by, of all people, his own father and Dr. Ketchum. When Edgar in trance asked any questions, as he always would, they began to ask for tips on the commodities market and even on horse races.
He began to discover that they were playing games with him. He became very angry, and he terminated his relationship with them and even left town.
His father's betrayal would take years to reconcile. Selma, Alabama offered refuge for the Cayces, and Edgar opened a new studio, the Cayce Art Company. But his unusual powers would once again be needed by 6-year-old son Hugh Lynn.
It wasn't until my brother dropped a match in a partially filled can of flashlight powder and burned his eyes real badly, and the doctor said he'd never see again, and that's when he started giving readings again.
After doctors insisted that one of Hugh Lynn's badly burned eyes be removed, Edgar gave a reading. A seemingly dangerous remedy of a tannic acid solution saved his son's sight. The Cayces welcomed another son, Edgar Evans, in 1918 as the First World War raged in Europe. Edgar had seen many of his former Sunday school pupils go off to fight. Now 40, he was beginning to feel old, but his dream of building a hospital seemed more urgent than ever.
At the end of World War I, this was kicked him into the whole hospital venture. He discovered that his readings could outline treatments for shell-shock veterans, and nobody else knew what to do with them. There were a lot of them, and those who followed his instructions got better.
When a young Kentucky friend, David Kahn, returned safely from the trenches in France, he asked Edgar to consider something he had never agreed to before, to use his psychic abilities to raise money for the hospital. Coincidentally, Cayce had just received a request from a Texas newspaperman for readings on oil prospects. Edgar Cayce's life was about to take a most dramatic turn.